I used the Galaxy S23 Plus for about a month, and I think it's a very good, very inoffensive phone on the Android side of the aisle. It's a balancing act of sticking to tried and true in some aspects like the design, and going all out in others like the chip and software features. But I have to give it the same critique as I gave the iPhone 14 Pro, which is that the S23 and S23 Plus are very similar to the previous 3 generations of Galaxies. So that does make them boring and not really innovative, but let me explain how I can say that and still really like these phones. My experience with the Galaxy S23 Plus started with watching the Galaxy Unpacked event, which announced some cool stuff, but also was kinda corny. The stream's video quality was not great and the set seemed like a glorified basement, so similar to the Pixel launch event, I was reminded how Android phone manufacturers are just not great at generating excitement. But the S23 Plus is a great phone, and I started thinking of it as such when actually starting to use it. Android 13 is very smooth at 120Hz, and Samsung's One UI skin is very matured by this point in 2023. It's also got a good number of features you won't find on other Android phones like lock screen widgets, dual messenger, app pop-up windows, and good lock, just to name a few. The software is also very stable and guaranteed to get updates for 4 years. Now, bias alert, I personally prefer the look of Pixel's software, but from polls I've seen on Twitter and elsewhere, that's not a super common opinion, so I won't say anything more than that. And finally, beneath the One UI skin, there's Android with its advantages and disadvantages. I feel like people already know whether they like Android or iOS and shop on the side of the aisle they prefer though, so I'm not really going to dive into that anymore. Under the hood, the Galaxy S23 Plus is powered by 8 gigs of RAM and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, the second fastest phone chip out there. It's a bit disappointing this phone doesn't outperform the iPhone 14 Pro, even though it came out half a year later at the same price, but realistically you'll never be able to tell. The 8 Gen 2 flies through anything you could throw at it, from everyday productivity to games, and it'll stay like that for years into the future. It's also worth noting this is technically an optimized version of the 8 Gen 2 called the 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy, and you could say it's a sliver better than baseline, but the important thing here is actually that this chip is what all Galaxy S23s use globally, so no more flakier Exynos chips for certain regions. Let's dive into the physical look and feel of this phone. The Galaxy S23 and S23 Plus have perfectly flat fronts and backs, both made of Gorilla Glass Victus 2 with slightly bulbous metal sides. Besides 3 cameras on the back that no longer have a shelf around them, there's really not much else notable about this design. It's simple, inoffensive, and definitely iPhone-esque for better or for worse. My specific model is green, and it's a muted green that's much duller than the Samsung videos would imply. On the front, surrounding a centered front camera hole punch, there's a 6.6-inch screen since I got the Plus model. It's 6.1 inches on the plain S23. For both though, the screen is 120Hz OLED that gets as bright as 1750 nits and to as high a resolution as 1080p+. This is an excellent screen that's very bright and colorful, in addition to being very smooth. There's a few specs here you could push slightly higher, but at the end of the day, this screen sits right near the top of the best phone screens. Alright, cameras. Galaxies have been photo and video heavyweights for a while, which is good considering this generation changed absolutely nothing. It's a 50 megapixel main, a 10 megapixel 3x telephoto, and a 12 megapixel 0.6x ultra wide that we got stacked on the back of the S23 and S23 Plus. And these yield great photos with plenty of contrast, color, and dynamic range. There are times I don't love the processing on these photos, which leads me to put the latest pixels and iPhones above the S23 Plus for quick snaps, but this is subjective and the specs and software meet the expectations of a $1,000 phone in 2023. The Samsung camera app is really decked out as well, so there's no shortage of modes and features for people that want to get the most out of this flagship hardware. Personally, the most useful feature is using Expert RAW to pull RAW files up to a full 50 megapixels. You can put those straight into Lightroom to edit to your heart's content while preserving as much information as possible. There's also an improved night mode enhanced by AI that makes snapping low-light photos faster and the photos themselves better. The selfie camera with autofocus does great and pulls detail out of hair and sharper parts of your face, which is something you wouldn't get with a fixed focus camera. And getting into video, the S23 Plus does well in all areas you'd expect: sharpness, stabilization, autofocus, and noise levels. I'd say this is the best video quality you can get out of an Android phone, of course understanding the iPhone is the best video quality in a phone period. And I'd be remiss not to mention the massive improvement in 8K video quality, which includes shooting at a wider angle and better frame rate, in addition to better stabilization and noise levels. There's some insane cinematic videos out there that make you think not just 8K video, but 8K video shot on a phone might just become mainstream, and I'll drop just one of those down below in the description. Now let's start getting into the Galaxy S23s. There's an ultrasonic fingerprint reader under the screen and front camera face unlock. First off, face unlock by itself is less secure and slower than something like Face ID, but that's not really the point of it on this or any other Android phone. It's more of a backup to eliminate failed reads from the fingerprint reader, the main unlock technique. And this one is top of the line. One thing I will say is there was some Pixel 7 Pro coverage I watched before this came out that made it seem like Galaxy's fingerprint readers were much faster than the Pixels, and looking back on my time with that phone, I can say in reality it's a very small difference. They're both at the top level of phone fingerprint readers. And as I said before, it is still technically quicker to put a fingerprint reader on the backside of a phone, but obviously it's more advanced tech to put it under the screen, so that's what flagships will have. Next, let me praise the battery life of this phone. The Galaxy S23 and S23 Plus aren't too shabby by the specs at 3900 and 4700 mAh respectively with 45 watt fast charging, but I personally found the S23 Plus to have good battery life, especially for not being that big of a phone. It seems like Samsung's doing a lot software-wise to make that happen, as the phone drops the refresh rate aggressively to the point I was seeing frequency bars on camera when no other phone I've ever reviewed has done this. But I'm all for it if it contributes to this phone having good battery life. Now let's cover buying the phone. I understand this is the least scientific section of my phone reviews, as in my iPhone 14 Pro video, I talked about going into the Apple Store and spending exactly $1,000 on that, and then with the Pixel 7 Pro, I spent a net $700 at Target, and for the S23 Plus, I actually went the online route and paid $900 for this phone that launched at $1,000. Deals are very quick to change and vary by location, so I'm aware this isn't super useful information, but I do think it's correct in showing that Pixels are the most aggressive with deals, followed by Galaxies, then iPhones. So I already said the base 256GB Galaxy S23 Plus is $1,000, but you can double the storage and pay $1,120. And as for the regular S23, that starts at $800 for 128 gigs of storage, and you can double that and pay $860. So all things considered, the Galaxy S23 Plus is a really interesting combination of elements in a smartphone. It goes all out with the best chip in an Android smartphone and some very capable software, but also keeps it simple with a plain flat design and the exact same cameras from last year. But those do all add up to a phone I really enjoyed using, and the Galaxy S23 and S23 Plus are definitely some of the best phones out, period. Being such a safe bet also makes me reminisce about when Samsung led smartphone innovation with overhauled phones year after year. Remember iris scanners and heart rate monitors? But here we have the good, inoffensive Galaxy S23 Plus. Thanks for watching. Assuming it takes me forever to chop up this A-roll and put in B-roll, 4 months since this phone came out making this video, but I don't know. I did an iPhone review 3 months after it came out, after that semester ended, and this semester is the reason this one got pushed so far back, so I hope it's still wanted by the internet. I don't know. It'll be a good video regardless.